Good evening, everybody. Today is Tuesday, February 6th, and this is a Moscow City Special Council meeting. Gina?
Would you all please stand with us and we'll recite the Pledge of Allegiance? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Gina, and we have got one item to discuss this evening, and that is the 3rd Street Corridor Traffic Management Plan. Les McDonald, sir, would you present this? And as we're talking here, folks, I just want, as a reminder, this is not about the 3rd Street Bridge, but it is about the 3rd Street Corridor and the traffic mitigation and different things that we're going to do. And with that, Les, you have got the podium.
Thank you, Mayor Lambert, members of the council. This evening, we are going to talk about a pretty crazy process we've been working on for about 2.5, 3 months. A lot of things that have occurred over that period of time related to the 3rd Street Corridor, and a lot of information to convey before the council this evening starts some discussion about how they would like to proceed. So I will try to step through it fairly quickly. As I say, there's quite a bit of information, but I'll try to do it in a way that hopefully makes some sense, and yeah, we'll work our way through. So starting out, of course, we're talking about the 3rd Street Corridor. As the mayor mentioned, this is not a discussion about the bridge and specifically, but this began with the bridge in the budget last fall or last summer. And you've seen this particular chart before for those council members that were here in the fall. This was a flow chart, if you will, of the processes that we're going to be proceeding through as it relates to both the bridge design development and the corridor work. So it really began in the September of 2017, and these first 3 or 4 tasks are actually all complete now. Requesting qualifications for design firms for the bridge, selection of design firm, execution of a design contract, and then the design process, which is actually underway for the bridge at this time. The item that we're here to talk about tonight is this one in the middle, which relates to the corridor enhancements assessment. And we're kind of right in the middle of this process where we've been working on the assessment, and depending on how the conversation goes this evening and what direction we may receive as staff, the next step would be then to step into design services. Excuse me. Schedule-wise, that's anticipated to run through probably the March timeframe, give or take, anticipating that in the March-April window is when we'd be taking both projects out to bid for construction bids, awarding those in roughly the May-April timeframe, and then looking at construction of the bridge and the corridor improvements concurrently through this coming summer, with finishing of those 2 projects in the fall of 2018. One of the tasks that we have undertaken as staff is looking at doing an assessment of the corridor and trying to determine how best to manage any potential changes that may occur within the corridor. We made a request to the Transportation Commission to assist in that process, and the Transportation Commission, when they looked at it, agreed that it probably made sense to form a subcommittee to do kind of a deep dive into the subject matter, because there's a lot of things to consider when you're looking at a corridor and traffic management, traffic calming type features. So a subcommittee was formed consisting of 10 individuals. You see them here on the screen. We had 3 members from the Transportation Commission, Philip, Brian, and Ben. Ben is the chair this year and was last year also. Our council liaison at the time, Catherine Bonzo. Members of the public at large. So we had Amy Ball, Marshall Comstock, Dan Carskellen, and Becker Gooch there to provide us some additional insight into what types of things could work in the corridor, what they see as community members, some of whom live on the corridor. We also brought in Mike Lowry as our technical advisor, outside tech advisor. He's a professor in civil engineering at the University of Idaho and does a lot of things related to the multimodal aspects that we're looking at in this corridor, particularly in the area of bicycle transportation. And then I continued in my role as a staff liaison to round out the group. That particular group of folks started meeting in November and worked through 8 meetings. They ran an hour and a half to 2 hours over a 4.5-week period. So roughly 16, 17 hours worth of meeting time in about 4.5 weeks, Thanksgiving thrown in the middle of that. Out of that, they came up with a number of things, but one of the things they started with, the first question we asked was, what are the priorities that you think we should consider as we go through this process? So they came back with a list of quite a few things, and we consolidated them into some general categories. The one that was most popular was just safety in general. Here are some of the comments with some specifics, but mainly looking at non-motorized users of the system, pedestrians, wheelchair users, bicyclists. The school kids, came up in a lot of the conversations around the schools, East City Park, making sure we had good pedestrian safety and that we did enhancements to the facilities that would promote that safety and use of the system. They also talked about bicycle safety and really looking at it throughout the length of the corridor. Somebody suggested protected bike lanes in that early process, and then generally looking at what goes on around the schools and creating that overall complete safe network for people walking. I should mention that in your packets tonight there is a table in there that has a list of all these types of things as well as some others, and kind of the status of what the subcommittee reached in terms of their discussions. Some of them they completed, some of them they just didn't have time to look at. Others they looked at some and said, we're not going to reach a conclusion, but it's just an item to think about. The next grouping was really in the multimodal aspect or access, so this is a similar aspect with respect to safety, looking at all modes of transportation within the corridor. They wanted to encourage non-motorized transportation options. They did identify, at least some of the members, that bike travel prioritized over on-street parking. That becomes a critical component as you look at some of these plans, because some of them do put in bike facilities at the expense of on-street parking. Talked about enhanced access to East City Park, general connectivity improvements for really all modes, transit, bikes, pedestrians, and then creating that safe, comfortable corridor for the bicycling community. The next grouping was limiting impacts. They understand that changes in the corridor have the potential to cause impacts to the users, to the adjacent neighbors, to the activities that occur within the corridor itself. So they identified that there are residences and institutions, being things like the schools and the church, that are along the corridor itself. The concern about what is the impact of removing parking on the street adjacent to some of those uses. They also, somewhat to the other side, said, this is a vehicular corridor, and we do have to remember that. And so we don't want to do things that are going to restrict the traffic flow to the point that it's not functional. So not overly limiting traffic flow was identified. There were suggestions about truck routes and the thought of, is there some need to or ability to remove trucks from this particular corridor? And they talked about that some, but in the end did not reach a final conclusion for what to do with trucks. Speeds were the next one. They wanted to make sure that we did control and limit speeds within the neighborhood, particularly east of Hayes, where it's going to see really the most significant changes in character of traffic that's out there today. Generally just looking at speed limits overall, and the suggestions were made early about limiting speed to 25 miles per hour. The group then went on to really look at a whole variety of things within the corridor. So after they identified those issues, they really started diving into what are specific characteristics of the corridor, what kind of things do we need to address physically within the structure of the corridor. This is a list of a good number of those things, although not all of them. Obviously speeds and speed limits right there at the top. They looked at traffic volumes historically, what current numbers we were seeing, accident history throughout the corridor, including bicycle accidents. There were, I believe, 4 or 5 over about a 10 or 11-year period throughout the length of the corridor. Adjacent land uses, as I mentioned earlier, and what effect we could have on those uses. The general modes of travel within the corridor. They did spend some time on the bicycle route and facilities plan, keeping in mind that the 2016 bike routes and facilities plan adopted by the council specifies 3rd Street as a intermediate level bike route, okay? Generally meaning higher volume or higher speed on that particular route. They looked at the sidewalk system, whether or not it was complete. It is not. They talked a little bit about the lighting out there, street trees, again, truck routes, the kind of things that perhaps could be looked at some point, and then intersection traffic control. So are there 4-way stops, 2-way stops, things of that nature. In the end, the subcommittee developed 3 plans, titled Plan A, Plan B, and Plan C. Their general preference was Plan C, and a little later on in the presentation I'll go through some of the details of what's in the plans. At this stage, so I'm just taking you through the process of how we got to this evening, so you'll understand all the things we've gone through, how the public input process has worked and all that, and then we'll dive into the details of the plans themselves. So after that 4.5-week intense period of time, went back to the Transportation Commission at their meeting on December 14th. The commission felt that they were comfortable with the 3 plans that were developed by the subcommittee, recommended that we start the public input process. So the public comment period was officially opened on December 20th, and on the 21st we finished a City Hall display right out here in the hallway outside of the City Council chambers. That was a display that was in place all the way through the end of the comment period, so roughly a little better than 4 weeks, actually. And within that display, there were a series of poster boards that looked something like this one. This is one example. They all had specific topics that talked about either the plans themselves or what the commission was doing, or individual items within some of the plans. There were 12 of them in all that were on display in the hallway. So things like this subcommittee discussed what the subcommittee was doing. The overview talked about some of the common features of all the plans, then each of the 3 Plan A, B, C concepts, and then you get into the more specific items or individual components within some of those plans. This is where things like separated 2-way bicycle lanes were introduced, which is a new feature within the city of Moscow. And then finally, a project cost for preliminary cost estimates for the 3 plans. Excuse me. This is just a shot of what it looked like as we were finishing setup. We weren't quite done, a couple of posters missing yet, but we had the posters on the walls all the way around, comment box set up here with cards on this long sheet here, which is, this is about a 22-foot long plot of Plan C in this case, because that was the preferred one. Also on this table, there are 3 booklets on either end that have the complete plan sets for A, B, and C. And then we had this interesting little floor graphic here. Plan C is the 2-way separated bike lane, and at its narrowest location, it is 3.5-foot wide lanes and a 1-foot wide buffer. And this is a life-size replica of what that would look like on the street. So 3.5-foot wide lanes from essentially a curb line to a center stripe, 2-way bike traffic, and this 1-foot wide buffer with some vertical elements between the bikes and where the cars would be out here. So we did that to try to give folks a visual understanding of just how big is that. When you see things on paper, they don't always necessarily relate to what it physically would look like on the ground. So that was a feature that we included in that display. We also held 2 open houses here in the council chambers, the first of those on January 11th, the second one on January 18th. In those open houses, we put out the long strip plans, the 22-footers, for plans B and A, as well as some additional poster boards with these categories. This other considerations set was really looking at just kind of discussing things were on the other plans, things that the subcommittee had talked about, but not necessarily reached any firm conclusions upon, such as lighting and truck routes and trees, maintaining traffic flow, things of that nature. We also had some boards that had information on the accident history, traffic flow volumes, and then we had the 2016 bike route plan. So that was part of the open house process in those 2 dates. In the end, the public comment period closed January 21st. Should note that this date required the relocation or rescheduling of the Transportation Commission meeting for January. They pushed it back 2 weeks so that we could have a couple of weeks after school started again at the university, so everybody was back in town, give them a period of time to come in and participate, so it wasn't all during a holiday break when people were out of town. At the end, we received a little over 100 comments, written comments, in the system via email and comment cards and those types of things. Of those, about 40% of them stated a preference for a particular plan option. There were some that said this one or that one, A and B typically, but the large majority, roughly 2/3, preferred Plan C out of the 3 options that were proposed, which is the 2-way separated bike lane. There were other comments that popped up, just things that, to think about as we go along the way. One of them is just cleaning up some of the catch basin surfaces so that they are not wheel catchers if there are bikes going across them with some of the grates. Again, addressing issues like truck routes and signage. Where do the garbage cans go? What do we do about lighting? Will there be improvements? A lot of these were just questions, some comments upon them. Some concern, and this was a fairly common one, regarding what happens when we remove parking, particularly around the high school and the 1912 Center. Those are areas that are highly congested, a lot of parking demand. Some concern about after-hour events, particularly at the 1912 Center. If we lose any parking within the corridor, that could have an impact. And then events, particularly at East City Park, also a potential impact if some parking is removed in that area. So questions and concerns in the part of the folks submitting input about loss of parking or potential loss of parking. There's some comments as well about just general congestion at the high school with Plan C in particular, with the multiple lane aspect. Are we going to create issues where there could be more conflicts? And then another one that came up a number of times was the issue of maintenance concerns, particularly how do you remove snow? And that's primarily related to Plan C. It has some more challenges than the other 2 with respect to snow removal, leaf removal, things of that nature. Okay, the Transportation Commission then on January 25th met and went through the input that had been received. They all received in advance a summary of all that input and then the actual scans of the individual documents that were submitted to us. Quite a bit of information. It's in your packets tonight as well. Hopefully you've had a chance to look at it. The commission then talked about, okay, where do we go from here and what did we hear from the people? What should we now do? Well, in general, and I will generalize here because it's, I don't necessarily want to speak for the commission, but they did not seem to really favor Plans A and B. They did prefer Plan C, but there was some consternation about Plan C. And they spent a lot of time talking about it during that meeting about how best to address the issues of maintenance and overall safety. And on the maintenance aspect, again, it's that question of Plan C has a vertical element within the road section. So you cannot plow the entire road to the outsides. You have to plow one side of that vertical element or the other side of that vertical element. And so it just complicates things and how best to manage that. And then the safety aspect really relates to turning movements and what do you do at intersections. And so when you've got multiple lanes of cars and bikes going through an intersection and a vehicle wants to turn off a third or come from a side street, making sure that we don't have conflicts there that create safety problems. Okay. So they spent quite a bit of time struggling with this, frankly, about how to manage it, where ultimately to end up in a recommendation. They did discuss briefly, but on a couple of times through the meeting, other alternatives. They looked, the option of a advisory bike lane was brought forward. One suggestion was made to consider doing a protected bike lane on one side and a regular on the other side. The one that actually probably got more traction than any of the others was the concept of just going to a standard bike lane, so it'd be a striped traditional bike lane on either side of the roadway, consistent with our street standards. At the time, we did not have a name for it. In the process of putting together the packet for this meeting, I did call it Plan D, and we actually did draw it up just so that folks could get a feel for what it looked like, because it was something discussed. But I do need to point out that this was something that was not fully vetted by the Transportation Commission. They touched on it, they talked about it a little bit, but it was mainly in the context of, well, what if Plan C has these complications? What do we do next? How else could we modify this? And the concept of the two standard bike lanes kind of kept coming to the surface as an alternative. They did not take any action on what I'm now calling Plan D. And the other thing I should say is that in the public comment period, we did have some folks suggest standard bike lanes along the 3rd Street corridor. So it was an option that came out of the public comment process. And I think it's beneficial for people to think about the fact when you go to public comment with some concepts, in this case plans A, B, C, what you're looking for is input. And at the end of that process, you take that input and you either modify the concepts that you've created based on input you received, or in some cases you may go a different direction and create a different concept or a different plan. So that's really how Plan D came to be, is that initially started with public comments suggesting that as a possibility. Transportation got into it and started talking about it a little bit, and so I felt it was probably an advisable thing to bring that forward as a possible 4th option to consider. Okay. They spent some time talking about a suggestion that was made that we consider a consultant review of Plan C safety. And the idea here is that with the concern about turning movements and intersection functionality with Plan C and the separated bike lanes, would it be advisable to bring in an outside consultant that is an expert in these things, that does this type of work on a regular basis, to do an assessment of our plan and let us know if they think it's viable and can be safely implemented. And so that was something that they seemed to like the concept of. They did not take any action with it. It's not part of the recommendation, but it is something that I think did meet with some favor. And ultimately at the end, after an hour and a half of gyrations on what to do, they went pretty simple and just recommended Plan C. Okay, so that is the Transportation Commission recommendation to Plan C. They did ask that we provide a good listing of pros and cons of each of the plans and the concepts, and that's what's in your packet this evening. So hopefully that captures the positives and the negatives of each of those. Okay, so to talk a little bit about what's in the specific plans, and then we'll talk a little bit about budget, and I'll wrap up. Okay, there are some elements that are common to all 4 plans. So these are things that regardless of which plan we would choose, if we choose any of these or even an alternative, these are the things that we would propose be included in any of them, right? So it's common to all of the plans. First off, speed limits. It was pretty unanimous, well frankly I think it was unanimous, everybody we spoke with, that the speed limit that currently is 25 on the west end and shifts to 30 miles per hour in the center section of the corridor from Van Buren over to Hayes, if I remember correctly, and then drops back to 25 miles an hour out to the east, be changed so that it's 25 miles an hour from Washington to Mountain View Road. So we dropped that center section from 30 to 25. Same speed limit the entire length. I hadn't run across anybody that had any issue with doing that. One of the concepts, again, common to all plans, is adding time-activated warning lights, so the kind of the bouncing ball light systems. I wouldn't necessarily say when flashing at this point, but it's just the added visual cue on the school speed zone signs. When we looked at traffic speeds, the one area we saw particularly we had problems was actually at the high school, where the speeds were quite a bit higher than they should have been, as the rest of the corridor fit the speed limit signs pretty well, but the high school had some issues. And so we felt that adding some additional lighting on those signs to raise awareness for the drivers that you're in a school zone would be beneficial. There are two of them, the high school and again at Lena Whitmore Elementary School. And we would suggest that these be done on a timer basis. So in the morning when just before school starts, for that period they would be on, they would turn off. Once school begins, they would start up again and run during lunch, and then off, and then come back again on the afternoon session when school's getting out for a period, and then turn off. One of the things that we've found, and you see a lot in the traffic industry, is if you leave something on constantly, pretty soon it's just background. You don't even see it anymore. And a lot of folks probably don't even see the blinking light that's above Adams Street right now, but it's there. The thing with this is if they come and go, they're more likely to catch your attention. So just an added influence. Again, all three plans. Raised pedestrian crossings, this is something that is truly a traffic calming measure. The American Public Works Association studies show that you can see anywhere from a 12 to 18% decrease in speeds due to these kind of devices. We're proposing 3 of them at these locations, the east side of the Adams Street intersection, the east side of Monroe Street, and the west side of the Cleveland intersection. And I'll show you those locations in just a second. They vary a little bit in width in terms of the top of these structures and the width of the crosswalk itself. So this is generally what they look like. This is the road section, sidewalk on either side, and there's a ramp that comes up. So the street elevation actually rises from the gutter up to the height of the top of the curb and matches the sidewalk to either side. Goes flat for a little while, either in our case 8 feet wide or 10 feet wide, and then ramps back down to normal elevation beyond that. A couple of things that this will do for you is this vertical element, this ramp, is not very comfortable if you take it too quickly, and the steepness of the ramp can affect that. So you set this up so that if you're going too fast, it's not, when your car hits it, it is not a comfortable feeling. And so that helps slow people down, which is the whole idea of traffic calming. It also, through some of the markings you'll see here in a second, improves overall visibility of the pedestrians, which is important in key locations where we'd use this. So just a couple quick pictures. You can see here where there's a ramp, there's a marked crossing at the top, ramp down the other side. This is the standard marking that you put on the ramp portion. So as you're approaching it as a driver, you see these white kind of chevron things facing you, as well as seeing the crosswalk that you're going to encounter. This is the view from the pedestrian's perspective, so there's a ramp coming up either side, and then it's just a straight shot at level grade across the street. As far as locations, plans A and B, actually all the plans, all the plans have them at Adams. This particular rendering is the same for A and B. So the east side of the intersection, this would be the crosswalk, 10 foot wide, ramp up, ramp down type of construction. In the Plan C version with the two-way separated bike lanes up here, this is how it would fit. It works just as well in any of the plans that we have proposed. Second location would be at the, I should back up and tell you, Adams, of course, the high school on the south, 1912 Center here. Very, very busy crosswalk. This is the southwest corner of East City Park at Monroe. Felt it would be a good location there as well. This particular drawing is from Plan B, which has some curb bulbs involved. Plan C, again, the bike lanes going through, works well. And the next location then is out at Cleveland. Now Cleveland is on the east side of Lena Whitmore, behind the kind of the park area and the playground. And there's a lot of kids that come up this way to come into the back of the school. So that was why they chose this third location as a spot for a raised pedestrian crossing. Okay, other common corridor components, intersection traffic control. Again, I think a fairly unanimous discussion about changing the traffic control at Hayes and Blaine Street intersections to four-way stop control. Now today, Hayes intersection, third stops, Hayes does not. At the Blaine intersection, same thing, third stops, and Blaine does not. These two intersections were seen as pretty important locations with high pedestrian traffic. Generally speaking, the Hayes intersection is likely to see fairly even vehicle load distributions coming from north-south versus east-west. Four-way stops work well in those situations, but it's also another method for improving overall pedestrian safety at those particularly busy intersections. Blaine, of course, is just south of Lena Whitmore, lots of elementary school kids going through there, so we felt that was a good place to put some emphasis on managing traffic and traffic speeds. Center medians, both ends, 5 foot wide to 9, actually even to 10 foot wide, now optioned for a median on the west end. That says the Washington Street. We didn't get that fixed. That's the Jefferson Street intersection. And then one near Mountain View Road, just some quick shots. This would be the 5 foot type median located just east of the Jefferson Street intersection with the crosswalk cutting through it. And some realignment through here, a wider version, which does require removing some parking on the north side, but it gives you a much wider median, creates a pedestrian refuge, enough width here that a pedestrian can come out on the crosswalk and be here waiting for a vehicle to see them and stop, and they're out of traffic, so there's some protection there. The wider one, either of them really, but the wider one even gives us more options to create kind of that entryway into this residential and institutional neighborhood as you're coming out of the downtown's business district. So as you're heading eastbound, this is a kind of a statement, if you will, of, hey, you're transitioning from the downtown commercial busy to something different. So pay some attention here as a driver. A couple examples. This happens to be one out on D Street we did a couple years ago in front of the middle school. This one's pretty narrow, but you can see a crosswalk kind of cutting through the middle of it. So that's the idea, is that there would be some kind of a center median, probably a little bit wider than this. Another one at the University of Idaho by the bookstore. Theirs is pretty long. It has 2 crosswalks that cut through it. And again, some kind of treatments at the beginning to help folks notice that it is there. The final common component is sidewalks. There's a desire to make sure we have complete sidewalks throughout the corridor, really running from Mountain View all the way down to downtown, Main Street. There are some gaps in that system, and so the proposals would fill those gaps in all 4 of the plans. So what you see here in the red is the areas where we currently do not have sidewalks, and we would propose to construct them. The actual location with relation to the curb will vary, depends on what's out there. We work with property owners adjacent to these locations in terms of things like landscaping and trees and other features that they might have to try to fit them in where they're going to be the least disruptive for them, but also meet our needs. So a section there just west of Garfield, and then some gaps here and to the west and Grant on the south side, and then continuing from Grant all the way over to Cleveland, a little gap on the north side as well, Cleveland to Roosevelt, and Roosevelt over towards Mountain View. Of course, the area of the creek doesn't have sidewalk at all on either side at this point. Okay, so those are the common things, and again, those would be the things that we would build with any of the plans as proposed. Some specifics about individual plans, because you're going to want to talk about which of these you like, and if you want to proceed with any of what we now have as 4 plans, or perhaps consider some hybrids or something different. Okay? So starting with Plan A. Plan A and Plan B are very similar in many respects. They are the ones that retain the most parking. Plan C pretty much takes out a good amount of the parking. Both Plan A and Plan B start with kind of the existing structure that we have out there today, which is parking on the one side, and then we've got that buffered bike lane, with the door zone buffer, and then a couple travel lanes and parking on the north. So generally speaking, it sticks with that same structure that's actually on the ground today, with the addition of the median, of course, at Jefferson. So that's what you see out there right now, looking up past the high school. There's the parking, the buffer, the bike lane, eastbound lane, westbound lane, and parking on the far side. So we would stay with that on those westerly blocks. As you go on to the east, now we're east of Adams, the parking on the south side drops out because the road narrows. Again, that's what's out there today. And as we get up to Polk Street, the road narrows again down to 30 feet. So we would go to 11, the bike lane ends, and we go to 11-foot lanes with an 8-foot parking on the south side. Again, that's what's there today. The difference is we're starting to add in things like curb bulbs and various locations to help manage traffic. This is at the East City Park, where the crosswalk is, the raised crosswalk, again, continuing that same cross-section, parking on the south, 2 11-foot lanes, all the way through Hayes. And stop here for a minute and talk about curb bulbs, these little guys right here, and curb extensions, some people call them. We have some of these in the community, and essentially what they are is an area where you take that curb line and you bring it out closer to the travel lane and then around the corner. There are a number of reasons to do this, a number of benefits. One is it does mark the end of the parking, so if you have a parking area, it does that. To me, one of the primary benefits of these is it brings that pedestrian from a location, normally they'd be back here, and if there's a car parked right here, the driver has a hard time seeing them. By bringing them out here, they're actually out beyond the cars, and they're much more visible to somebody in the lane, whether it's a bicycle or a vehicle, right? It shortens the crosswalk, so the amount of time the pedestrian's actually in the crosswalk goes down, and the overall narrowing of the roadway also creates a constriction so that drivers feel a little less comfortable going at speed, so again, they tend to slow down. So plans A and B both use these pretty heavily throughout the length. A couple examples, this is actually in the area of Lena Whitmore on the northwest corner of the school. There's a school there. You can see here where there's parking, there's a curb bulb that kind of shoots out from the original curb line, comes around a corner, and away you go. So you can see where you'd put that pedestrian out here rather than back here when you're trying to look past vehicles. Another example, same intersection looking to the north, you can see one on that side as well. And how much narrower the road section is for the driver as they're looking down the road section. So Plan A continues with that. We do pick up parking again about half a block east of Blaine because the road widens, and then we continue with that section, which is parking with the door zone buffer, bike lanes both sides, and travel lanes of 11 feet all the way through. When we get out to Mountain View, all of the plans go to a 3-lane configuration left turn pocket onto Mountain View with bike lanes, or well, I should say A and B with bike lanes on both sides. Okay, Plan B, very similar. The main difference here is that we change sides of the street for the parking in a number of areas. So again, we start out with the same general configuration. In this case, we're showing the wider median there at Jefferson. Again, the raised crosswalk, the same structure that we've got today out there east of Adams. And then as you get into the 30-foot wide stretch of the roadway, we've put the parking on the north side rather than where it exists today on the south side. So that does make some differences when it comes to things like transitioning out of the bike lane into the travel lane, because we do have to put the bikes in the travel lane here. That's why the sharrows, and that's what we do today. But it makes that transition a little better than Plan A. When you get down to the park, there's a little concern about putting parking up against the park side of the street because kids running around can't see them, ball comes out, you know, the usual story. So we want to avoid those kind of potential safety issues. In the area on the west end of the park, I felt the type of park landscaping here and the usage is very different than the other areas. There's a lot of vegetation. It's not where the kids are playing ball much, that type of thing. So having parking there maybe is a reasonable thing. But when you get to about midpoint on the park, it opens up. That's where the volleyball court is. A lot of the ball games and things happen. So moving parking back to the other side of the street was important. So what you see here then is a transition through the Lincoln intersection where parking is on the north side and then it drops down to the south side here. And so the street has to take this lateral jog. So you're driving along and you veer left to get to the new alignment across the intersection. It will look something like this. So you're coming along, there's parking on the left, which would be the park side, just like that one. Come through here, parking switches to the other side of the street, so you make this transition laterally. And again, it's called a chicane, but it's a feature that does create some traffic calming and slowing of speeds. In our case, as much as anything, it moves the parking away from the park in that open play area. And then we continue that section, parking on the south side through Hayes, past Blaine, and then we go to a 2 bike lane configuration, just like Plan A did. The parking starting on the south, but again, bouncing to the north side at the Grant intersection. So we then carry that north side parking all the way through to where it terminates before we reach the Mountain View section. So A and B, a lot of similarities. They use curb bulbs extensively, I should say. They retain parking on at least one side of the street in the narrower corridor sections. They use bike lanes where we can, but in the narrow sections, they require bicyclists to take the lane. It's a shared use facility. Some folks aren't as comfortable with that because when you get into higher volumes on a street, shared use is, there's some limitations there in how usable it really is. So Plan C then was kind of the next greatest generation of concepts. This is one that includes a 2-way separated bike lane system. And just zooming in here at the Jefferson Street intersection, we would have the 9-foot parking on the south with the door zone still that's out there today, a 12-foot travel lane, a center median of some kind, a 12-foot travel lane westbound, and then a 1-foot wide buffer. Remember the picture I showed you? It would have those vertical elements, the little curbs, and then the delineator pipes that are sticking up, and then 2 bike lanes going in opposite directions right there. So at this part of the corridor, they'd be 4.5 feet wide. The narrowest they reach is 3.5 feet, and I think we get up to 5 at their widest point. So it varies depending on street width. There is a loss of parking in some areas as we go along. A couple of shots of what these things look like. This is probably down in Portland, but similar kind of situation. We'd have a curb line, some width here, 3.5 to 5 feet to a skip stripe, another 3.5 to 5 feet out to the 1-foot buffer, then vehicular lanes out here with the little vertical delineators in there to help provide that message, if you will, to the drivers that this is a border, this is an edge, don't go into this bike lane. A couple other examples of those, some of them are cross-hatched, not necessarily something we'd propose, but one of the things you see here is this green crosswalk, and that's the kind of thing that you'll see on the plans, particularly Plan C, along the bike lane. That green crosswalk is the symbol that's used to tell drivers that there is a bike facility crossing at this location. So when you're this guy coming up to the intersection, you got the normal crosswalk over there that's white, but out here there's a green crossing because you're going to cross a bike facility. So look for bikes along the way. That's really what that's telling you. This is one that may be very similar in size to what we're talking about. I don't know the exact scale on this, but just kind of eyeballing it, this may be pretty representative. And where we do have room on particularly the west end, there would be parking as the plan is proposed next to the buffer. Now there's pros and cons with that. The one good aspect of it that people really like is as a bicyclist, you're riding along here, this is an added protection between you and the traveling vehicle, right? Because they can't get to you through the parked cars, right? Some of the downsides are if you're traveling along here and this guy opens his door, then you have the risk of encountering the door. In our case, the bikes would be coming towards us in this lane, so they'd be facing the front of the car, and the passenger in the car would be facing them. So hopefully the visibility there is better than you might otherwise encounter, and you're less likely to have the conflict. But that is a potential issue. The other concern that can happen when you have parked cars along here is this line of cars provides you physical protection, but it also creates a visual barrier. So as you're approaching an intersection, if that happened to be an intersection right there, can the cars out here see you over here with a row of parked cars in between? So that's one of the downsides of this kind of arrangement. We do have this within Plan C. There are some areas where we could modify it and move that parking to the opposite side of the street. Other areas we have parking on both sides. So just kind of walking through from there, this is again the elevated crossing at Adams. You can see the 2-way bike lane on the top. Here's where we have that parking right adjacent to the bike lanes and no parking on the south side. So that's one area where it could be flipped to the other side of the street if we felt that was a better situation. And then when you get to the 30-foot wide section up past Polk, all the parking goes away. There's no parking from Polk all the way to the half a block east of Blaine. It's just 2 travel lanes, 2 bicycle lanes. And here you see those green crossings for the intersections. At East City Park. And then coming out of it at Blaine, we go to a wider section so we can start adding parking back in on the south side of the roadway. The bike lanes continue with that configuration, parking on the south, until we start the transition at the Mountain View intersection. Plan D, and this is kind of coming late to the party, and I know folks have wondered about how it came to be, and I talked about that a bit earlier, but again, this was just trying to capture some of the suggestions from the public comment period and the discussion, as brief as it was, with transportation. And essentially, it's a pretty basic concept using the existing structure that we have today with, of course, the modification of adding an island here in the median, and then going with what we have existing to the top of the hill, and once we reach Polk Street, where we go to the 30-foot wide section, again, no parking, but instead of 2 lanes on the north curb line, we've got 1 westbound lane on the north, 1 eastbound lane on the south. They would be, as this is drawn, 11-foot wide travel lanes with 4-foot bike lanes. We talked about, could we go to a 10.5-foot travel lane with 4.5-foot bike lanes? Maybe. Our standard vehicular lanes and our street standards for this class of roadway is 12, so we're already under that. So there's a little question there. But as drawn here, it would be 11-foot with standard 4-foot bike lanes on either side, which again is the street standard that we have today for collector arterials and minor arterials, 2 travel lanes with bike lanes on either side. And just how that would progress as you got out past Blaine, where we'd start picking up parking again, east of Blaine, and then the transition back to the intersection at Mountain View. So it's pretty straightforward. One of the things that this option does, as option C does not, is this resolves the maintenance challenges, because there's nothing actually other than paint striping in the road section to get in your way when you're doing plowing and street sweeping. So it'd be similar to what's out there today with respect to maintenance. There's a diminishment in terms of traffic calming, in that you no longer have that vertical element next to the travel lane that makes you feel constricted. It's paint. And a narrower painted travel lane is a traffic calming feature, but it's maybe not as effective as having that vertical element that the Plan C does in that buffer section. Okay, so that's the plans, and everybody always asks about the cost, so we'll talk about that briefly. We did preliminary estimates, and we came up with construction numbers for the 3 plans. We added some contingency, 20%, because the way the market is these days, you have to be careful. We added some potential funding for design and construction management, not knowing if this was all going to be in-house designed or bringing in some consultant assistance. So plans A and B are very similar. They are the most expensive because they include a lot of concrete work. All those curb bulbs or curb extensions add to the cost. And so that's where the biggest difference lies. Again, all of these plans include all the common things, so the 4-way stops and the raised crosswalks and all of that. But the differences that you really see in pricing are due to the fact that the construction of the curb bulbs, that's a lot of concrete work. Plan C is the lowest cost option amongst the 3. And that is because the concrete work goes out, you're adding in vertical elements that really aren't all that expensive, frankly. Now these particular ones are in yellow here because one of the things that we identified in looking at the maintenance issues on Plan C was that there are portions east of east of Hayes on the south side where there's not a tree lawn where we could store snow. And if we're going to have to push all the snow to the south away from the vertical delineators, we have to have a place to put it. And we're taking up all the road with travel lanes, so the tree lawn becomes the storage spot. Well, there's about a block and a half there east of Hayes where the sidewalk's up against the curb. So we're anticipating that those numbers would go up a little bit to potentially relocate that section of sidewalk off of the curb line, We haven't run the numbers on it, but that's why those are in yellow. You could see that Plan C costs come up a little bit due to that change if we implement that. I've not run a Plan D cost estimate. It's probably going to be similar to, but cheaper than Plan C. Really, the element that goes away are the vertical components in the buffer. Everything else is paint, and then all the common core stuff. So similar, but probably a little bit lower cost is what I'd anticipate for Plan D. This thing's a little hard to see, but I wanted to show you this list. This is the Children Pedestrian Safety Project ranking. Whew, a little fuzzy up there. This is a list that just came out recently, and this has to do with surplus eliminator grant funding for which we have applied. It was money that was made available for transportation-related projects, and specifically in this case for children pedestrian safety projects. And overall, there were 71 projects that submitted for a total asking price of about $12 million statewide, and there we are at the top, #1 ranking in the state, which is really cool, frankly. We were really pleased to see this. We believe the legislature's reached the point now where they've taken the actions necessary to allow this funding to occur. And so we're waiting for the notice from the granting agency as to whether or not we will actually receive this. We anticipate that we will with that ranking, and this is intended to help pay for some of those improvements within the corridor. This will supplement the funding that we've already established within the city budget, but it's just added funding to help us manage the cost within this corridor. So we're really pleased with that. So just wanted to point that out. At this point, I think what's before you is figuring out how you would like to proceed. And really, there are the questions of, is there a preferred plan? A reminder again that Plan C was the one preferred by the subcommittee, and ultimately was the one preferred by the large majority of that 40% of the public input that stated a preference. The Transportation Commission again recommended Plan C. And then that takes me to the staff recommendation. So my opportunity to tell you what I think. Really what we are suggesting is that we proceed with the design of the common features. So all those things that are common to all the plans. We can start those really regardless of a decision tonight, assuming we're moving forward with corridor enhancement work. We could start that process to designing those features. We would recommend that we do hire a consultant to do a safety review of the two-way bike lane concept to help us understand if the concept that we've proposed will provide a safe corridor, including those potential conflicts at the intersections that we've talked about. Bringing in somebody that does this on a regular basis, who's seen these applied elsewhere, who can help us identify that, yes, it works, and here's some things you can do, whether it's education, signage, whatever it may be, to make sure it works. Or conversely, they might come back and say, well, it's maybe not the best application because of these reasons. Okay. So depending on how that comes out, I think it would be very beneficial for us to receive that further information to make sure that we are doing this correctly if Plan C is the way we are proceeding. Okay. If they come back and say, yes, that all looks wonderful, our staff recommendation is that we would proceed with Plan C, so we're consistent with all the other input that you've heard this evening. If, on the other hand, we find that it is not feasible for reasons that they would identify, and we're not able to find alternatives to fix those issues, then staff would suggest probably considering Plan D as maybe the next best choice. A and B just did not get a lot of traction with the community, and I think it had a lot to do with the fact that it was the shared bike lanes creating some concern. Plan D has its own issues, obviously. There's some concern about, is there enough traffic calming involved? There are features, again, consistent with all the plans, so we would have traffic calming as well. So the thought would be that probably Plan D, from a staff perspective, might be the next best choice.
I think, Les, before we ask questions of you, I want to get some comments from the public, and we're going to come back to you, I'm sure, because there's going to be a lot of discussion on this evening. So what I'd like to do, even though this is not a public hearing, it is a public meeting, I'm interested in hearing what folks have to say about this. And what I would like to do, as I had said earlier, this is not a discussion on the bridges, it's a discussion on the corridor and what we're going to do with the corridor. And so what I plan on doing is limiting the overall conversation to 90 minutes total, and I'm going to let people have 3 minutes apiece, as any other council meeting that we've ever had. So when you come up in front of us, please state your name and your address, and I will time you, and be courteous with those, because I know there's folks that would like to speak about it. So please come on up.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of council, and Les. My name is Michael Kite, 10090 7th Street. I have 7 comments that I'll try to squeeze into 3 minutes, but as a former professor, I'm normally sort of geared
okay,
to
I
talk
can
in
cut you off,
increments
Mike.
of 50. Please do so. First, I'd like to say, and really to thank Les and the city staff, this has been a difficult but really good public input process. Catherine was involved in all the meetings. A number of other people were involved during a really busy time of year. And I think the discussion and the work and support of city staff has been really, really helpful, and we really appreciate all that. Second, I'd like to say I really strongly support the 8 common elements that Les identified. Those are critical. I think whatever else happens, that they are important for traffic control and for traffic calming. I'd also like to acknowledge the work of the subcommittee, and especially Mike Lowry, who served as a technical assistant. Mike is a national and international expert in bike and pedestrian facility design, has a lot of experience traveling around, and really provided the subcommittee and the commission with a lot of information from around the country and around the world on specific things to be able to see what these things look like. We probably haven't had a lot of information directly, or our experiences in Moscow. I'd like to characterize a discussion of the subcommittee, and especially the Transportation Commission discussion, talking about Plan C, not as consternation, but as really struggling with something that was new. These design elements are new to the city of Moscow, and I think that both the task force and the Transportation Commission really spent a lot of time trying to think through these. And so it wasn't consternation, but it was good, honest struggle with how do you really do this right so that the final design really meets all the goals. Mike Lowry has also done additional research, and he'll probably talk about this, or at least I hope he will a little bit later, about two-way separated bike lanes around the U.S. And he's talked to colleagues from around the U.S. and gotten, after the final vote of the Transportation Commission a couple of weeks ago, other examples of separated two-way bike lanes in which traffic volumes are higher than on 3rd Street, and in which there are very regular cross streets, like we have on 3rd, that are stop sign controlled, and they work. And so it is good to be concerned about safety. As a longtime traffic engineer, safety always has to be the first thing that you deal with. And I think those examples show that those designs can work. I'd also like to say that in my mind, Plan D doesn't exist. The elements that Les talked about were discussed briefly at the end of the Transportation Commission, and I think to formalize it as a Plan D is really not a fair characterization. Plans A, B, and C were fully vetted during a 3-month process. Long discussions, long meetings, and what's now called Plan D, to me, really does not exist. And I think it's a little unfair to talk about that as being considered an option at this point. The 7th point, final point, hope I still am within my time limit.
You're getting close.
Okay, I'll talk faster than normal even. If the city staff feels that having an outside consultant to review Plan C, I like the idea. I really, really like it. It was a part of Les's list of recommendations. I think it can be done fairly quickly. Oftentimes you hire a consultant and it seems like it goes on, and there's reports and there's lengthy discussions. I think something like this can be done really quickly in a 1 or 2 day effort. I've been involved in these efforts in the past. They're really well scoped out. The consultant knows what they're going to be asked to do. You do some run-throughs, you get some assessments from the consultants, and I think that there's some really good bike and pedestrian consultants out there who can do this quickly to help keep this process moving along. Thank you for your time this evening.
Thank you, Michael.
Hi, I'm Amy Ball, 601 East 3rd Street.
Hi, Amy.
Hi. I was privileged to be part of the Transportation Commission subcommittee, and I want to thank council and city staff for listening to the community and really including public input in this process. And I especially want to thank Mr. McDonald and his staff for the truly excellent job they did with the public displays about the 3rd Street corridor designs. But I was a little dismayed to see a Plan D on the agenda for tonight, and I really want to echo the previous comments and urge you not to consider it as a viable option unless it is fully publicly vetted. I know that during the public input process, there were many people who suggested to me that they would prefer to see 2 one-way protected bike lanes, and that was not mentioned as an option tonight. So while I would strongly encourage you to listen to the public and go ahead with Plan C, if you choose not to do that, then I hope that before proceeding with a different plan, that you continue to build the goodwill that you have with the people of Moscow and get public input on whatever plan you decide to proceed with. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy.
Hi, my name's Amy Mazer. I live at 1415 Pinecone Road. I've been a property owner in Moscow for 15 years, and I work at WSU. So I think I've given a lot of taxes to this community. And I love this community very much. And I first would like to say I thank all the work the various players have done on this process. These plans seem very well thought out and extremely responsive to the process as it rolled out prior to the elections. So I'm very dismayed, though, however, more than dismayed, I would say disappointed that there is no option that includes a pedestrian bike bridge. And I know the mayor said we're not talking about the bridge, we're talking about the full corridor. But when I saw these presentations, there was not a lot of discussion of exactly the situation of the bridge, and it seemed like the whole thing was all of the options were premised on the fact that there is going to be a car bridge across, that cars are going across. And I'm really very disappointed in that. I voted for several different people on the council that got elected because of my desire to have a community that supports smart growth. Smart growth to me means bikeable, walkable passages. There are 4 reasons why you should have a pedestrian and bicycle bridge. 1, elegance, effectiveness. You have, if you have a bicycle pedestrian bridge, all of these things, we spent how much time listening to the bumps and the this and the that, traffic calming measures, no traffic calming measures there. Second, health. If we want to be a community that I think we all agree on, that wants to attract business, attract innovative new community members, I think that we present the potential of a very healthy community. And I think you have this missed opportunity. I feel like you've missed this opportunity to actually say, we're going to have a bike and pedestrian bridge and a corridor that's going to be a showcase for a healthy lifestyle of people walking and biking. To me, driving through town and parking your car is just promoting a different kind of lifestyle that is not good for us. We have high rates of obesity. We have high rates of problems due to not exercising enough. I don't understand why the city council wants to have a corridor that does not emphasize pedestrian and bicycle usage.
Amy, could you wrap it up, please?
That's 3 minutes?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, all right. And then finally, is the business. I think that you have a fantastic opportunity to attract new economic investment in this area that is focused on smart growth, that's focused on the idea of having a pedestrian way in the main part of town. And the last point would have been safety, but I think that's pretty obvious as well. So again, sorry to say this, I appreciate your work, but like everyone, we always work hard, and I think it's good to have an engaged democratic process, so I appreciate that. And I hope you do take this seriously, because I think there are a lot of people in this community that are just as disappointed as I am. Thank you very much, and sorry for going over.
Thank you.
My name's David Pimentel. I live at 123 North Hayes Street at the corner of Hayes and A. I am an active cyclist. I bicycle to work. My children bicycle to and from school every day. We take 3rd Street because 3rd Street is the street that's graded and is the other options are so much steeper that quite regardless of the lovely greenway that was mapped out, it's so much more circuitous, and we've got to get to work and school, and so we take 3rd Street. I know that Plan C presents some challenges. There will be issues. We will have to learn as a community to deal with the snow removal issues and things like that. They've been dealt with in many other places. We are not charting new territory. The two-way bike lanes work remarkably well in quite a number of places around the world, and I lived in the Netherlands for 4 years with my family, and where we were very familiar with these things, and we loved it because our kids could bicycle in the community, and we could feel perfectly confident and safe having our children do that. 3rd Street is the perfect place for us to start. I guess what I want to say is that the question, I think, for the council is whether we want to make Moscow a bicycle-friendly community or not, whether we want to make that a priority or not. Because if we don't take this opportunity to put in the most bicycle-friendly option available, we're sending a very strong message to the community that we are happy to have everybody just get in their SUVs and drive, because this is the opportunity to do it. And 3rd Street is the perfect place to do it. It's a connection between East City Park and downtown. It's the place that bicycles go already. We can learn a lot from putting this in and using it, and the community, I believe, will respond. I believe we will, after Plan C is implemented, there will be a tremendous demand to expand and put similar lanes on Mountain View that will connect it down to the Leta Trail. I think that the Transportation Commission, which, as Mr. McDonald said, approved it. They approved it unanimously. It was a unanimous vote of the Transportation Commission. It was an overwhelming favorite of the public. It's tremendously less expensive than the alternatives. I think it's virtually a no-brainer if we care about the quality of life in this community and making it a bicycle-friendly community as a part of that. I guess I'm a little baffled at the misgivings that have been relayed here. I attended the Transportation Commission meeting. I think the Transportation Commission was trying to be very sensitive and listen to the concerns that Mr. McDonald has raised, and he's raised quite a number of them, and very respectful of his efforts and his expertise I think that's where most of the misgivings came from, to the extent they were misgivings. But in the end, notwithstanding all of that discussion, the final vote was unanimous, and I think the members of the community have spoken. I have a very difficult time seeing how the council goes anywhere other than with Plan C, and what a great opportunity. This council, I think, needs to be visionary about making this the community we want it to be. And this is a terrific opportunity to do that by embracing Plan C and running with it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David.
David Hall, 1334 Wallen Road. A motorized bridge was the catalyst for this traffic calming project. And I'd like to hear each council member's justification for such a bridge. Thank you.
Thank you, David.
Mark Solomon, 722 South Jefferson. I also own the property at 704 East 3rd, which I resided at for some 15 years. And I'd like to compliment the council members, the commission, and the city staff for doing an exemplary public process in terms of developing alternatives here. It unfortunately is the classic cart before the horse, in the sense that you are following through on policies that were established some 20 or 30 years ago that were not revisited, creating the need for this accelerated discussion in terms of timing it with a bridge. I would suggest that you need to go back and revisit that, but if that's not on the table for your discussion, I would support the Plan C option. I would also say that the primary reason I do not continue to live at 704 East 3rd is because there's already an incredible amount of traffic on 3rd Street. And it is a safety issue, and it is not one that is going to diminish by creating a through thoroughfare to the east side of the town. Is only going to increase no matter what type of traffic calming measures we put in place. I appreciate, and truly do appreciate, the emphasis that's being placed on allowing for safe bicycle traffic and pedestrian traffic within that motorized corridor. But the question really should be focused on, do we need 3rd Street as a motorized corridor? Or is there an appropriate alternative that looks at how we redevelop this city as one that has an intensively quality core that we can go to and we can take pride in, and that enhances the core values of this city. Instead, by moving traffic through in the safest way as we can, but instead of moving traffic through, that's what we're doing. We're moving things through what should be the vital core of the city. So I would ask you to keep that in mind as you move these considerations forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Good evening, Mayor, Councilman. Susan Wilson, 20208 South Main Street or 2780 North Mountain View Road. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you for staying the course on this. This is long overdue. I'm excited. I actually love all the plans because whatever you do is going to be a huge improvement on what is there, including the motor bridge going through. I can't wait to see it. I did have a couple concerns going through some of the plans that maybe you can consider, and I feel almost like I might get stoned up here because I think some of the parking elements and eliminating them, I have concern about. If you ever drive around the school time in the other neighborhoods and the congestion that are there already, even though you have parking on 3rd Street, I'm concerned about how that's going to exacerbate the rest of the neighborhood. I read through the memo. I am concerned a little bit about the maintenance impact on some of those plans. It's going to be additional cost and equipment and labor hours, but at the end of the day, any of the plans are going to be so much better than what is there now that I'm excited to see it all. I really appreciate Les's timeline. I didn't realize before I came here that, hey, we might be able to have this done by the end of the year, and I think that is fabulous. So I encourage you, whatever you do, stay the course. Plan C is a great plan, other than what I consider to be some issues on the parking. The picture that Les put up there, and I don't know what they call it, but the option of having the lanes and then the parked cars and then the separate lanes, I thought, how are they going to do things like snow removal and things like that and blocking the cars in on both sides? So that kind of created a little bit of concern to me, but sounds like that's easily addressed. I think the staff has done a fabulous job of putting these plans together. The amount of input you're able to put into these traffic calming measures has been incredible, and I think you should just take it, make your decision tonight, run with it, and I can't wait to see it at the end of the year when it's done. Thank you.
Thanks, Susan.
My name is Dean Pittenger, 1017 East D Street, Moscow, Idaho. And I really do appreciate the work the committee is, this impressive planning. And my one concern comes back, I'm sorry, to the bridge. And somebody has mentioned before, some of the traffic calming measures you put in, if you open it all the way across to Mountain View, are not going to have a lot of impact because the traffic's just going to increase. And I think that's an overriding concern. And that's my main point. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dean.
My name is Tina Hilding. I live at 411 North Howard, and I wasn't going to speak, but here I am. I guess I would say
Well, we're glad you're speaking.
this is a wonderful public process that perhaps should have been done last spring before the decision was made to go forward with the bridge. So I would say that, like Mark said, the cart before the horse. It should have been done last spring. And the second thing, I'm a big avid bike rider who uses 3rd Street often when I'm able. And I'm also a taxpayer who works at WSU and lives in Moscow, unfortunately. And the other thing I was going to say about the importance of minimizing, or someone mentioned, this to me was a very, it made a lot of sense. We want to minimize, try to figure out a way to encourage more pedestrians and biking. And someone mentioned that it was like when you're trying to lose weight. You're trying to lose weight, you don't do it by continually putting on a bigger belt. That's, and by putting in, more traffic opportunities for cars, it's like putting on a bigger belt. It's not addressing the issue. So I'm not sure I got all that straight.
Thank you, Tina.
Garrett Thompson, let's see, 1010 Pinecrest Road, just outside of Moscow. First off, I really would like to thank the city staff and Les for all your time, and the subcommittee that was put together, and Council Member Bonzo for being on that. What I can say is, unfortunately, this whole issue has been a very controversial one. I don't like controversy. We all live in Moscow because we have many different reasons of why it's special to us. I went halfway around the world to go to school and then came back and, called my parents and said, I want to come home to Moscow, Idaho, which I promised I would never do when I left. So I was completely wrong on that one. What I can say is I am supportive of the bridge. I am supportive of Plan C. I want us to all work together and see this through. You know, people fighting, it doesn't make Moscow any better of a place. It makes it a worse place. People see us from the outside. I just want us to get through this, get it done. And then the only other comment that I have to say is I reiterate a few other people's comments. I really hope that Plan D does not gain any more traction here tonight. When I looked at the plans, I just was aware of A, B, and C. And so, other than that, I thank you all for your help and your time. And yes, that's it.
Thank you, Garrett.
Joanne Manita, 203 South Howard. I'm glad so many people have pointed out that Plan D was not vetted. Maybe there were a few people who said something about something at the Transportation Commission. I was sitting there listening. I didn't hear anything that would have led to Plan D. And I watched the video that Tom Hansen had. I still didn't see where it came from. The problem is not only was it not vetted, it's not only is it not traffic calming, it's traffic encouraging. We see right here, if you take the cars off the street and paint lines, it makes it look like the lane is wider, and it will encourage more traffic and higher speeds. And that's what's happened in front of the high school. The city has documented this, they studied it, and cars are driving at 30 miles an hour. They're not slowing down to 15 because it looks so nice and wide and comfortable. If there were a lot of bikes going back and forth, maybe, but the bicyclists are on the sidewalk, and when you have more cars, you're going to have fewer bicyclists. Only the brave few will be out in the street. And I just want to say about the comment about having a consultant. I think it's a great idea. Let's not phrase it to ask the consultant, tell us if this is safe or not. Let's phrase it, tell us how to make this work for our population and maintain safety. Otherwise, you're going to get a, yes or no answer. We want to solve problems here. And I know that's what you're all here for. So I would encourage Plan C with a consultant to show us how to do it right. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanne. One quick comment that I'll make, because I was at that Transportation Commission meeting that was on the 25th, and Joanne, like you, I didn't really hear the Plan D, but what I did hear was that none of these plans are perfect, and each one of them has some flaws. I did hear that too, and I think that's where some of these other things came out. I'm guessing. That's just a guess. I sat back in the audience and just listened. Joanne, I'm just right about where you're sitting right now. And so I'm guessing that's maybe where it came from. I don't know, Les, but that's what I think. Anyway, I'm ready for the next person who wants to get up and speak. I just thought I'd throw that out there. Okay, well, I'm going to close the public comment and we will move on, folks.
Go on.
Mike, did you want to speak?
No, I really wasn't going to. But
Well, come on up here. All right.
and I don't have too much to say. I feel like so much has been said and said well. And I also don't want to just take the time to thank everybody, but I truly do feel like there's a lot of things to go around. I was impressed with the process that happened. I do think there's a lesson to be learned about the order of these things, and hopefully in the future that can be addressed. But I think given the situation, it was done the best it could be done. I enjoyed getting to know Les McDonald and getting to know the other members of the committee. I also enjoyed getting to know people in the community. Everywhere I went, I seemed to attract conversation, whether it was at the grocery store or wherever. And I don't know how many times I had to kind of go over the same things. Les must be getting exhausted of, I'm feeling a bit exhausted, but I have enjoyed those conversations. One example is Joanne. I'm really impressed with all of the great comments that she makes. She sends me emails frequently with really insightful ideas, and I truly enjoy them. They've been great, and I think this was a good point that she made here, Les, that I think that in talking to a consultant, there's a lot that can be said about how it's asked, what they're asked to do. And if we can turn to them to help us make something work, I think that's a good approach. So that's my comment. I think, and Mike Lowry at 123 South Monroe.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you for the work that you did on that as well, the subcommittee. Okay, now I will close the public comment period, and I'll turn it over to council. And Catherine, you were the liaison for the subcommittees and the Transportation Commission, so.
And like everybody else, we've all been thanking each other, so thanks and all else. I'll cut to the chase that. But there are some people I wanted to address first of questions, and I felt like this started such a bad taste in the mouth of people because they thought in some way that the 3rd Street Bridge, so I'm going to address the bridge. And so what I pulled up is the summary of the budget. So in July, we have our budget workshop, and we get 2 big binders. The smaller binder is the summary, and there's a letter on page 44. It's a whole letter from our city supervisor to all the council. And on page 44, under capital project funds, it says, in 2017, council approved the use of the Hamilton funds for the playground. Another project proposed is a 3rd Street multi-modal bridge spanning Paradise Creek and providing vehicular, bicycle, and pedestrian access. This project is proposed to be funded by a transfer of general fund capital projects accumulation to the street fund capital projects account. The street fund improvements pavement maintenance program has been transferred to the capital projects fund, that's a big number, and is funded in the amount of $872,000 and with an excess. Major multi-year street fund related project, blah, blah, blah. So we have a budget hearing, and every year, it starts now, going through the departments, and then by June, these books start coming out. And this is the first pages of the book of 256 pages, and then we have another huge binder that has the line items. To also address the bridge, in our comprehensive plan, in chapter 3-10, under community mobility, there's a lot that talks about transportation on the east side of town. And there's a paragraph that talk about that we need improvement to deal with the volume of traffic, and we'd like to have more transportation, like transit types of things. And the multimodal plan, which is part of a document of its own, but is referred to in this document called a City of Moscow Strategic Plan that lists all the plans that we follow to figure out what to do for the city. In chapter 4 of the multimodal plan, it talks all about identifying how to deal with these major areas. And it's on page 4-1. It goes through several pages that I highlighted. But I wanted to bring this up because I felt like the way the council was treated and city staff, that in some way that this had been done without the process wasn't fair. And we've been going through the process. And what we've done with the subcommittee in the transportation is exactly what we've always done. And so that's what I wanted to start with. Okay. After that, I did a lot of research, and this bridge, I came to town 20 years ago. This bridge has been talked about for a long time. And I didn't know the politics. All I knew is that when I was running for council 2.5 years ago, at the forums, I was being asked about this bridge. So I started doing research, and I find all kinds of notes from the Transportation Committee meetings starting back in '94. I mean, this corridor has been up and out for a long, long time. So I read and figured out what's the best thing we should do. And I thought about it. And it follows these plans that our city staff is following and that the consultants and the people that have worked for our community have put together. So that is really important to say, and that it's been budgeted for. I also support Plan C, and I appreciate every bit of what Becker Goosh and Amy Ball and Phil Cook and Mike Lowry and Mike Kite and Joanne, and I'm sorry if I'm missing somebody, that came to those meetings and spoke, Dan Carscallon and
Marshall Comstock.
yeah, Marshall Comstock. They came, everybody came and laid it on the line of what was important to them. And I loved how much you said, make the corridor bike friendly. And I feel like Plan C totally does that. And just to make a little addendum here about Plan D, I know that street staff has a lot to do with snow, and I have a feeling Plan D is addressing staff's responsibility in dealing with the resources and the ways you have to get rid of all the snow that piles up. So I feel like that was an internal issue of trying to figure out what to do. I don't know if that's right or not, but that's just me looking at things. Anyway, so I've thought about this a lot. I've read a ton, and I think we should be proud of what we've done as a community to push this forward and get this done.
Thank you, Catherine. And I'll get to you in just a second, Gina, but there's a point I want to make as Les hit this. In his presentation, he talked about some of the problematic things being snow removal, garbage cans, I wrote that down, and parking was an issue with Plan C, and so maybe that addresses some of the things that you were talking about, Catherine. I don't know, but anyway, I wanted to bring that up. I know we got some of our street guys here, so when we get into the discussion, I'd like to call on them and see what they think, but Jeannie, you've got the floor right now.
Well, again, like Catherine said, let's just all have a thank you moment, you guys, and I that's not dismissive by any means. Each and every one of us in the room has devoted time and thought and blood and sweat to this whole project and deserves gratitude from the rest of us on how much we've put into this. It is unfortunate to me that this has become a little bit of a divisive issue, and that bothers me. I'm like Garrett. I'm not a big conflict fan myself. I will say that I think it was brilliant to put the subcommittee together and to pull in the concerned parties and work towards some options. I think Plan C is good. I think it's solid. I do have some questions, however. And are we, can I ask?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, so we were talking about, you called them traffic controls. Is that Les McDonald speak for four-way stoplights?
Stop signs?
No, not stop signs, stop lights.
No, not lights. No,
Okay.
Traffic control is just a generic term for different types of traffic management. So it could be yield, it could be stop, it could be lights, any number of things.
Okay.
In this case, we're talking stop signs.
Okay. So is there a possibility for a traffic control concept at 3rd and Mountain View as well? I did not see one listed. You spoke of Hayes and Blaine, and to me it seems like almost we should be including Mountain View in this process.
Yeah, the proposal keeps turning that up. The proposal is four-way stop control at the Hayes intersection and the Blaine intersection. We did not make a proposal to modify the Mountain View intersection at this time. Mountain View, of course, is a much higher volume roadway than anything that comes into it. And so that's always a question about, should you put stop control on a high volume intersection or high volume roadway like Mountain View? It's obviously come up a couple of times as it relates to other intersections on Mountain View, White Avenue and D and F most recently. And so, yeah, it's something I think we can look at. It was not something we discussed in this process.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't see it mentioned. That's why I asked the question. I believe that the idea to bring in a consultant is important in that there are any number of intersections along our corridor that bring into high relief that moment of conflict between the bicyclist and the car. And while I'd like to think that I will always be, as a motorist, most of the time, that I'm going to be awake and aware and not talking to somebody in the car, singing along with the radio. To see that green, I just think that we need to get one more set of eyes on those intersections. I listened. I'm the new liaison for the Transportation Commission, and I listened while we all struggled with how you address that conflict at each of those intersections. And so I think the idea to bring in a consultant is a very good and very sound idea, even if it means additional cost. I think Plan D got mislabeled. I don't think it was a plan. I think it was, again, and I don't remember who it was in the public comment, but said that essentially it was a reaction to how to make Plan C feel a little bit more comfortable. I think that was the case. I think Plan D should have been called like Plan C subset something something instead of Plan D. And hindsight's 20/20. I think we do need to be very, and I want to hear from the streets guys. We need to really, really think through snow removal and sweeping. That's part of what makes Moscow so great, is how well you guys keep this community clean and free of snow and that sort of thing. So these are big things. So I guess I would really like to see Plan C happen. Again, like we said in the Transportation Commission, these bike lanes, the opposing traffic, what are you calling them?
Two-way separated bike lanes.
Okay. Two-way separated bike lanes, thank you. Is that like traffic control measures? I need to learn the lingo. I think this is a great idea, but we have got to do it right. And so, and I really felt like that was the wish of everybody that's been involved in this. But I watched while we all squirmed at the Transportation Commission trying to make that work too. So, so transportation, I like Plan C, and I like it with the consultant attached.
Let's, Tyler Palmer's here. Tyler, would you come up and address the snow issue on this Plan C? So we can talk about it right now. So, because there's been several comments on that, please.
Certainly, Mayor Lambert. Yeah, thank you. Appreciate having the time to take a minute and chat about this. I'm Tyler Palmer. I direct the Operations Division for the City of Moscow's Public Works Department. Included in the council packet, I believe there's a memo from Steve Schulte, who's our street supervisor. We had the opportunity, as the plans came together from the Transportation Commission, to perform a maintenance review on the plans as they were presented. That's an important part of anything that we do, is we get plans that are generated throughout the department that'll get sent over to our Operations Division, which is something that, just another indicator of how well the City of Moscow runs. You know, a lot of times Operations Divisions, engineering works in a bubble and things just happen, and then they drop in our lap, and it's here, figure out how to deal with this. And so we really appreciate the coordination that we have throughout the department, that we get the opportunity to look at these things, because ultimately we can build a lot of things, but if we can't maintain them, it doesn't do us a lot of good. And so, yeah, we appreciate the ability to be a part of that process. Two things that I'd like to preface my comments with is, we have a wonderful professional streets department. We really have wonderful staff who look at these things and they take very seriously their job. We train them well, we equip them well, and we expect high levels of service. There's an expectation of very urban amenities here in Moscow, and so they take their job very seriously. I mean, some examples are snow removal. Over the last 5 years, we've diminished the time that takes by 40%. You know, we've increased our sweeping. There's a lot of things that they've done to really take pride in our community, like we all do. The second thing that I'll mention is that we run very lean. We don't have guys standing around. We run a very lean department. Gary gives a presentation each year when he compares our staff per population to a lot of surrounding communities. And as a general rule, the City of Moscow runs lean, and that holds true for our streets department. So as we look at a lot of these things, we like to be problem solvers. That's what we're called upon to do. We get told what the desires of the community are, and we try and figure out how to make it work. As we looked at Plan C, we had some definite concerns, and I think they're captured in the memo that Steve has generated. Steve Schulte's here if anyone has any additional questions. Does a wonderful job keeping our streets department going. There are some infrastructure improvements that would be necessary, especially in that block and a half stretch that Les McDonald indicated, in order to make it feasible.
Are you talking about between Blaine and Hayes?
Yeah, we've got about a block and a half where we have that stretch where we don't have a green strip and we just don't have anywhere to physically store the snow. Plan C is definitely the most challenging from a maintenance perspective. It will take a larger maintenance investment over the years for the community. That was the one stretch where we had really no answer for how do we do it without some sort of accommodation, the addition of some green strips, some infrastructure improvements. With that, we can make it work. I mean, it's something that we can do and that we can work with. It will take more staff time. It takes more of an investment. And so as we look at those things, it's just, I wouldn't say that trepidation is the right word that we approach it with, but just trying to be realistic about the investment of time that it takes. Every additional thing that we add, every additional investment that we have to make from an hour standpoint, it's additional sweeping, it's additional equipment, it's different equipment that we currently have. We don't have a sweeper that'll fit in that lane. And we can get creative. We can look around and say, okay, maybe the university has a smaller one that we can come up with some sort of cooperative agreement. I mean, we do this kind of stuff all the time. But we just, we try and go into it with our eyes open and say, with an already very highly tasked staff that we're adding maintenance hours to, there just needs to be an understanding as we move forward. If we come back and say, hey, we've run out of the ability to either service levels have to diminish or staff levels have to increase. At some point, there's a giving point where we're doing what we can with the people that we have, and we're very close to saturation with that. And so that would be the only understanding that I would ask for through this process. But with the infrastructure accommodation through the stretch that Les had indicated, we believe that we can come up with a maintenance plan that will be more maintenance intensive for us, no doubt, but we can make it work.
Catherine, did you have a question?
Well, I just remember, do you remember the conversation that you and I had at one of the open houses about whether or not we actually need to plow in the winter, which would be a conversation that we'd have to open up to the population, because we know that the particular group that's going to be using this bike lane will probably not be using it the 60% that this is attracting. And so maybe there's some options so that you might not have to plow. So it could possibly not impact the maintenance department in a negative way, because I know Mr. Schulte, your memo was from December 20th, and so it was prior to a lot of other conversations about Plan C. So I just didn't know if maybe you all had talked about, well, what if we don't or do this?
We had some pretty extensive conversations in the aftermath of that. We had the opportunity to meet with several of the subcommittee members. Mike Lowry and Steve and I spent probably 2 hours in my office running through options. We spent some time at the open house, as you indicated, discussing that with a lot of people. And then in the aftermath of that, we were able to get together with our Public Works Director, with Les McDonald. Steve and I were able to sit down and kind of talk through what are options and looking at different alternatives. Steve and Mike and Les and I all got together to discuss what does it look like? Do we try and close it seasonally, et cetera? Worked through a lot of those, and without getting into a ton of conversation, in order to maintain the traffic calming that we're desiring, with the vertical elements involved, keeping it open during the winter, or at least keeping it delineated, would probably be necessary. There would be a need for understanding about the timing as far as the maintenance on those facilities go. We probably would not be able to plow that as quickly as we would like in some circumstances, depending on the volume and the size of a storm and other responsibilities that are going on. So there may be times that maintenance is a little bit delayed, and the level is different than what we are typically used to on that 3rd Street corridor as it's currently constituted. But yeah, those were conversations that happened quite extensively since that point.
Thank
Yeah, I
you.
want to go to Jim. Jim?
I just wanted to ask Tyler if you've been in contact with other communities that have these kind of facilities in place in typical climates or in similar climates, and how do these people deal with this, and how might we implement their strategies or augment what they do to improve our situation?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jim. I think one of the wonderful things that we have is that the council's been very supportive of is professional development for our staff, and so we're able to get training and to attend these sorts of things. There was a great presentation given at the American Public Works Association conferences last year that I attended about bike facilities. It was given by some folks from the Nordic countries, where obviously they have to deal with a lot of snow, and it was specific to bike facilities and maintenance on bike facilities. And so it is something that we work with. Boise, the city of Boise had a similar example fairly recently where they had an installation, and there was some back and forth with Ada County because they have a different setup where Ada County does the road maintenance and within the city of Boise. There are ways that we can maintain these things, and there are precedents for these things, and we have the know-how to do it. A lot of it comes down to just having the right equipment to do it. It's a narrower facility, and also I think it also helps really emphasize the reason for the street standards that have been developed. When we ask for green strips, it's really easy to say, oh, let's take out the green strips type of a thing, pushing the sidewalk here and there, this makes it more convenient. But a lot of those things in our climate, we have to really consider what that entails. And so I guess that's a really long answer to say, yes, Jim, we are in contact. There are other examples in areas that get snow, and there are ways that we can work around the challenges that we'll face from it.
Well, it seems to me the difference in cost between the A, B versus C, that we could afford some machinery to deal with that situation specifically, in terms of snow blowers and maybe a specialized burminator to soak up that snow, and maybe a different brooming device that would deal with that for way less than a lot of concrete.
And a lot of it does come back around to just man hours. It's the time commitment for staff. It may seem like a small thing, but even just something like, now instead of just running a track or a plow in a traditional pattern where the snow's being pushed off to the right-hand side of the plow, off to the side of the road, now somebody's got to flip a plow. We've got to push to center. There's a berm left in the center, so you have to try and time it out pretty closely, especially with narrow lanes, so that we push it all to the south side of the road. Those types of considerations that, in order to keep it safe and functional, take an additional input of time. Any anomaly that we introduce to the system increases our labor input and our time input, and sometimes specialized equipment input. So yeah, there are those things that will increase with that type of facility.
Thank you.
Brandy?
I don't think I have any questions for Tyler.
Okay.
But
Well, that is fine. Tyler, we'll call you back up if we need you.
I do have a question for probably Les, maybe Gary. With the grant, which elements would be covered in that grant? Is it all those 8 or 9 common elements? I know that not all the bike and pedestrian elements would be covered by that.
Right. Generally speaking, it would be the common elements, so the raised pedestrian crosswalks, the lighting on the speed zone signs, the center medians, refuge islands. The speed limit posting is simple. The stop signs are simple.
Sidewalks?
So it covers.
And the sidewalk work.
Yeah. So it would
is
cover
the biggest.
all of the common elements. It's anticipated to, or?
It is anticipated to cover all of those common elements. And we have some possibility of adding perhaps some additional treatments on the side streets in the form of curb bulbs to help improve the pedestrian safety along the sidewalk system of 3rd Street itself. So that's something we'll be looking at if the grant comes through as we anticipate.
Right.
Les, there was 1,000, I read somewhere, 1,031 new feet of sidewalk that would be in part of that. Is that correct?
Yeah, the estimate uses 1,000 feet. The sections that I showed you earlier, that was
the red
about
sections.
that. Yeah, about 1,000 feet. With the addition of that block and a half that we're talking about, there would be a little more than that.
Yeah. Brandy, did you have?
Well, thank you. That answers that question. I just did want to make some general comments. I agree with what just about everybody here has commented on, that the public process for this, everything leading up to this meeting tonight has been outstanding, and many efforts made for multiple opportunities for the public to provide input and to discuss that input. And while I appreciate what you said, Catherine, about the history and the budget and looking back and all that information being there, I think that the public experience was very different in this process than it was when the decision was made to approve the multimodal bridge. And I just would like to throw out there, it doesn't have to be a discussion for tonight, because I know that's not what tonight is about, but if the council would be open to discussing an option to receive some public input, whether it's through a workshop or another means, to reconsider that multimodal bridge versus a bike and pedestrian bridge now that we have a lot of additional information that the council that made that decision didn't have at that time. The decision was made with what you had at that time. Now we have a lot of information about all these corridor improvement options, what the costs would be, what the challenges are to them. Clearly, Plan C is preferred by the public, the Transportation Commission, the members of the subcommittee that spent a lot of time on that. But there are still issues with that. And if it weren't for the multimodal bridge, we could be considering maybe 100,000, maybe 150,000 for a bicycle pedestrian only bridge, not needing any of these plans, using the $250,000 grant to accomplish all these other pedestrian and bicycle safety issues, going perhaps with a more traditional bike lanes like we are in other parts of the city, versus close to $1 million. So I just want to suggest that before we go too much farther, we may want to take one more opportunity to be sure that this is really the direction that we think is best and that the community wants as far as the outcome and the money spent on it.
Art, we'll go to you next.
I had an entirely different tack. I was just going to ask under Plan C, even though the streets aren't striped for it or marked for it, about how many parking spaces are lost through that plan?
The parking, as you say, is not currently marked, so it's an estimate at this point, but it looks like approximately 120 spaces along the entire length of the corridor.
Any particular hotspots, like I know Hayes to Blaine would lose the parking?
Yeah, certainly the 30-foot section from Polk all the way to Blaine loses all of its parking, and the most heavily used section of that is between Hayes and Blaine, where all the apartments are located. So yeah, that was an area that did raise probably the most concern when it came to parking. And then obviously the areas around, city, the 1912 building and the high school, and any impacts on parking there.
So yeah, that was my only real question. The rest falls into the realm of comments later on.
Well, now's as good as any. Go ahead and comment what's on your mind, and we'll go to Ann after you're done.
Given all of the input that we've had here, Plan C sounds by far superior to the others, but I would also like to see, as others have suggested, a consultant review to look at the 11 versus 10.5-foot lanes down towards this end of the corridor. Also, the case of how easily Moscow can adapt to the Netherlands or other European areas when it comes to a two-way sequestered bike lanes, whatever the two-way is. And also especially with some attention to what goes on at the cross streets, as Gina pointed out, with the green stripes looking both ways. Analogous to trying to pull out of Wendy's sometimes, and here comes a bike sailing the wrong way down the sidewalk at you. It's not what we're used to here. And then when it comes to bikes entering and leaving those protected lanes, have the consultant look at that too. There's no reason Moscow can't adopt to this, but I wonder how many impediments might exist along the way with that one. But also as a final coda to that, also getting city staff to contribute to the consultant's report a better estimate on the cost and the time devoted to having to redo the snow and leaf removal and other maintenance issues associated with that. But for sure, getting started on the hardscape, all of the sidewalks, the curbs, the traffic tables, the protected crosswalks, things like that. I think we should proceed directly with those, because all of the other things within Plan C versus other options, the misappellated Plan D, amount to paint and other items that are not necessarily going to cost a lot of money on top of, but getting started with the initial stuff so that it coincides with the completion of the bridge, I think, is the way to go with this, with input from the consultant and city staff later on.
Okay, Ann?
Yeah. When do you anticipate that we'll have an answer on whether or not we've received funding for the corridor?
Boy, that's, it's a little unknown. The issue was that the legislature originally, authorized the funding, but they, as I understand it, did not authorize the expenditure of the funding. That makes sense. And we believe that they've done that now. And so it's really a question of when the agency, which is the Local Highway Technical Assistance Council, LTAC, makes the announcements. And I'm really anticipating it any day, but I don't have a set schedule at this point.
Thank you. I would just like to echo Brandy's sentiment that with respect to the one budget hearing that we had over the summer, I think that we all take our jobs very seriously as far as serving the public and listening to that input. And I think that anytime that the public shows an overwhelming a desire to give us feedback on something, I think it's important to take that seriously and provide that opportunity. And so I'd be interested in having that discussion as well. And again, I know that's not what is the topic for tonight, but it's something that I'm interested in seeing happen.
Well, one thing I'll say, ladies and gentlemen, is that multimodal bridge is in the budget. It was put in there 6 months ago, and it's moving forward as we speak. And so we're looking at putting out requests for the proposals to build this thing as part of the budget. And what this corridor is about is, sure, it's an enhancement with it, but as one person spoke this evening, I think it's very important that the city of Moscow gets a chance to step out of the box and do something kind of bold. And I believe that. Look, we know all the plans we have, there's flaws probably in everything we'd say and do. And we're never going to know until we really do something. And one thing I do know, change is very uncomfortable for most people. And we've seen it through this entire process. And which isn't a bad thing because, I think all of us are susceptible to that. And one of the things I always have truly liked about Moscow, it's been a very vocal community that we've ever been in. But there's one thing about Moscow we do very, very well, and that's solve issues and solve things and move forward and do the next thing. And we're kind of example setters for that, in my view. So I just wanted to throw that out there to you guys.
I'd like to ask a question about, I'm in favor of the Plan C, and it's a fabulous unintended positive consequence of getting this whole ball rolling downhill in November of 2016. I never expected to get all these enhancements that make human-powered transportation so much better. And so thank everybody for all their efforts to make this all come together. Once we get this in place, is there anything in this, in these plans to, for metrics in order to identify how the traffic does change in terms, and I don't mean just cars, I mean how many bicycles, how many more cyclists have we attracted, how many more pedestrians have we attracted, and so that however this works out, we have numbers to apply to D Street or to 6th Street or to wherever else, how this works in terms of traffic counts. Is that something that's in our budget for this, to deal with those metrics?
Yeah, I think that's a fairly easy thing to accomplish. I mean, we do traffic counting on a consistent basis every year. We do the vehicular counts. We did a specific vehicular count on the corridor back in, I think it was October this year, to help inform this process. What's the current count as of a few months ago? That included speed assessments at those select locations within the corridor. So we can replicate that counting process for the vehicles for both volume and speed into the future. What we don't really have at this point is a pedestrian and bicycle counts, but I think we probably have the opportunity this spring to gather some of that type of information before anything else has changed out there. And then we can use that as kind of that benchmark moving forward to then continue to do those assessments later on. I should clarify one comment that was made earlier this evening in the testimony about the counts that were done in front of the high school. Those were a snapshot at that point back in October. That was after those bike lanes were installed, but there was not a comparison made to speeds at other times. So it's a high speed at that time, at that location, and it was after those bike lanes were installed, but we have not done any research to determine was there a change from something prior to that painting to after that painting. It was a snapshot just at that moment. But yes, the short answer for your question, Jim, is that I think there are ways to do a metric and do the field data collection in terms of vehicular speed, volume, pedestrian usage, bicycle usage within the corridor.
Yeah, I think that's essential to know whether this is whether we've made the right decision. Did we attract enough more cyclists to make this worthwhile to add to another street? Or is it just a feel-good thing that doesn't really work? And, I'm pretty sure that it will work, but it would be great to have some data to back that up.
Well, and there are other elements of the overall bike network that are still going in. We've talked about that for a while now, but, as time allows with our busy street crew, we are adding more and more facilities across the community. As those connections are made and all the infrastructure is installed, we're anticipating seeing an uptick in ridership as well. So this will go right along with that.
As well as the underpass.
That too.
Will be completed this year as well. That will
Exactly.
be another.
Wide Avenue.
Art, you had
Yeah, I just wanted to make another comment about pedestrian traffic. With all of these plans, and Plan C included, there's also the ability to complete the sidewalk network on the Third Street corridor to enhance pedestrian safety and access, and we haven't talked about that hardly at all, but that's always an ongoing topic with this community, is to complete the sidewalks around here. And here is a perfectly fine opportunity to do 1,000 more feet of sidewalks in the city and connect all the way from downtown all the way through to Mountain View with completed sidewalks. And I think that's really important for pedestrians and people with wheelchairs, motorized or otherwise.
Well done.
Well, I just have to talk a little more. So, I agree with the mayor about the opportunities to be innovative and do something different. And I think that's what a lot of us are attracted to with Plan C. I would also just encourage everyone to think about that extension with the bridge too. I mean, the multimodal bridge is a pretty standard, typical thing. And I know that that's in the budget and that's the way that we're proceeding. But it's not too late to have a discussion. We're only halfway into the design process, what we budgeted for that. And so I just wanted to respond to that. And also to acknowledge what, I don't think he's here anymore, but what Garrett said. I think it is important for everyone in our community to be able to work together and make this be something that, we can feel good about. And that would be another reason why I would encourage us to consider an opportunity for that public input. Even if the outcome doesn't change, I think there will be a much different feeling from the public, the good feeling that they have tonight from being included.
All right. I guess I move. Yeah?
Yep.
All right. I'm going to move that we accept the Plan C for the Third Street corridor and for staff to proceed with the improvements in that project.
I will second that.
Might I suggest an amendment to include a consultant's
Yes.
review on this in
Yes.
terms of the safety of the bi-directional bike lanes, the entry and exit to those bike lanes, cross-street traffic, and also seek some input from city staff as well on not only those issues, but the potential cost of maintenance.
Did you get that, Okay, let's redo this, because that was a. So we've got a motion to approve Plan C with consultant review, comma.
Right, but we were directing staff already, so it's implied that they're going to be doing the work to look at maintenance and the improvements or the things that are necessary. So there's
But the
just,
consultant's gonna.
the consultant's the second thing.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
So I can recite again if you want.
Reader looks like he's got something going.
Gary, you got something you want to say? You're busting at the seams there.
Not particularly, but, so the original motion was to approve Plan C and direct staff to move ahead with implementation of the plan. Your request for amendment was to include the services of a consultant to review it and provide feedback, and to also do an estimate of the impacts on maintenance by city staff because of Plan C. You can do that without an amendment if the maker of the motion and the seconder would approve of it. You don't have to go through the whole motion for amendment process.
I approve.
Me too.
Second. Further discussion? Randy?
When, Jim, your comment about some data, could there be something about the parking too, the impacts of the parking? Where do those, I'm not sure what that would be. Particularly that between Blaine and Hayes, you know, I have gone by there and done some counts myself, and I'm wondering where they end up and if we want to be able to take a look at that and see how that is working out. I think it's another way of evaluating the success of this.
Yeah,
That's just another metric.
Yeah,
How does
it
this
is.
work
It's a
out
good
in
one.
terms of
Right.
parking? Does it create a bunch of problems? But I think this is something that the consultant would be included in the consultant's work.
Not necessarily on that end of it. I mean, really, would be looking at how do we implement and do it effectively. As far as the performance metrics, if you will, we could certainly add to that a parking component. I think that's a good idea to look at, again, this spring, but while school's still on, what the parking usage is today on the street and on the side streets, maybe a block out or something like that. And then afterwards go back and look at that again to see how it's changed. And then we'll probably also have to look a little bit at private parking, because there's a lot of private lots in those multifamily zones, to see if maybe that takes up some of it. So I think that's possible to do that as well, just as part of that assessment process into the future.
Okay, I'll remind councilors, we got a motion and a second on the table here, so do we have further discussion on the motion before I ask for a roll?
Can I just clarify? I want to make sure I'm understanding it correctly. So the motion is Plan C sort of contingent on the findings or the recommendations of the consultant, and that we, no, okay.
I didn't take it as contingent.
Gary, you want to restate that?
Yeah, my understanding was the motion was made to approve Plan C and move toward implementation while retaining the services of a consultant to provide feedback and recommendations for implementation.
Right. So we're not really making a space for if the consultant says,
The motion would
advises
have to
us against it.
clarify that, because that was not
My
implicit in
motion
the
is just
motion.
to proceed.
so regardless of what the consultant says, that's what we're saying, we're going to go with it.
Yeah.
If I may, I would suggest that, if for some reason the consultant cannot help us get there, that we would come back and report that to the council.
Right.
To say that, yeah, we
It's like
just-
the first
we
step.
couldn't find a way, and so therefore we need to think about alternatives.
Gary?
But that, again, I think it's something that, the plan is to proceed with how do we implement.
That would be the hope.
Gary, you had.
I think Les makes a great point. As council gives direction to staff, staff assesses, uses the resources that you provide us. We bring those, if something is unexpected, something does not work, I think our track record has been very good in coming back to council and saying, look, it looked good on paper, it doesn't look good in implementation, we need to rethink this. My suspicion is, based upon both the practical implications of what staff will be doing, the recommendations of the consultant, if there's anything that comes up, it will be coming back to you again.
Jim?
So the motion is to proceed with option C. what I see here is that we have like about seven common elements that we could continue with regardless of the outcome of the consultant's report. So the consultant's report has primarily to do with the two-way separated bike lane. So we could amend the motion, I suppose, to say go ahead with the common elements, and that the completion of the bike lane would have to do with what results we get from the consultant.
Again, if I may, I think what the motion is satisfactory, because you're telling us to proceed. And
So you can put the-
we will proceed as we do with the elements that we can start right away. We'll proceed
25
with
mile an hour
those.
speed limit,
And
four-way
for the
stop
other
signs.
thing, for the study, we'll proceed with that, and they'll run concurrent with each other. Because for the other elements, I've got to get it through a design process, right? The actual striping and the bike lane aspect of it is very easy in terms of time to catch up, based on what comes out of the study itself. But yeah, we'll go ahead and proceed with all the design of the rest of it, so that it can be on the same bid schedules into the spring. So we'll just manage that time like we would any other project.
Okay, so you're under the assumption that the common elements are implied in the motion, and we can proceed with those.
That's part of,
Right.
right.
Yep, okay. Well, okay, I'll start to roll with Ann.
Aye.
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 All right.
Aye.
Okay, we will move forward with that as directed. I want to say special thanks to all this subcommittee folks, Ben Calabretta, Philip Cook, I seen Phil back there, Brian Johnson, Becker Gooch, Amy Bull, Marshall Comstock, Dan Karscalen, Mike Lowry, thank you so very much. Comments from Mike Kite as well, Catherine Bonzo, Les McDonald for the work that you guys did up here. I was here both January 11th and January the 18th, and I talked to hundreds of people about this, and as well as the Transportation Commission. And I've got a gut feeling, ladies and gentlemen, that this is going to turn out really well. It's going to be something we're going to look at down the road and say this is a good thing for us. And I think it's going to be an envy of a lot of different cities in this state. That's just my own perspective, folks. With that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn. Let's go. All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned at 9:10, folks. Thank you very much.